Ladies and gentlemen, this is the 78th day of Russian invasion and 9th year of war by Russian Federation against Ukraine. I'm Andriy Shevchenko. On behalf of Ukraine Media Center at Ukrinform, I'd like to welcome all journalists who tell the world about our fight for freedom. Our today's guest is Volodymyr Kudrytskyi, chairman of the board of Ukrenergo. Mr. Kudrytskyi, you are welcome to take the floor. And my first question will be this. How is our energy infrastructure being restored now in liberated territories? Thank you for this question, Andriy. Welcome, everybody. So, Ukraine and Ukrainian energy system, energy grid over these years of independence has never seen such a scale of destruction as we have seen since the 24th of February, after the beginning of wide-scale invasion by the Russian Federation in Ukraine. The whole oblasts or provinces of our country have fallen victim to those large-scale damages, destruction, and after the occupation, after liberation, in such oblasts as Kyiv Oblast, Siversk areas, Slobozhanщина, Mykolaiv Oblast, we have managed to restore more than 90% of infrastructure in those oblasts, in those areas. Maintaining that way reliable energy supply, electricity supply to more than 6 million of our compatriots. The amount of work we have been doing in such a short time frame have also been unprecedented for us. And of course, our success has been based on good preparations, which started even before the winter. In 2021, we created the necessary reserves of material resources in order to have the inventory of all we need in our warehouses to be able to quickly restore both lines and substations. We have created 40 repair teams which have been working 24/7 on restoring the electricity infrastructure for Ukrainians. And by now we have already restored 28 high-voltage overhead lines and 12 substations. We have resumed operations of those facilities. This is, roughly speaking, 10% of our total infrastructure we have had to repair. Just for you to understand the scale of that destruction, we had one line in Mykolaiv province where there were more than 300 places damaged. We had to check that overhead line manually in order to resume its operation so that users in Mykolaiv Energy Hub would have electricity. So this is rather difficult work, and it's about huge personal risks, unfortunately, for our repair teams. Often they would be working under shelling. They work in territories which still need demining. So, of course, it's a great courage of those employees, energy sector employees, who have been restoring those trunk lines. And the same applies to our colleagues from oblast energy companies who risk their lives to restore energy supply for Ukrainians. What are the consequences for your financial situation? How do you manage to support your maintain your financial stability? You know what? In 2020, we had a very bad year in financial terms. We had huge losses, 27 billion hryvnias, because of the lack of funds under our tariffs to cover all the required expenses. But in 2021, even though there was still about 7 billion hryvnias we were missing from the tariff, but due to profitable operations in other areas, in other activities, we have managed to make some profit. Not huge profit, but still a profit. I'd like to use this opportunity to show this slide. We evaluate our profit for 2021 at about 140 million hryvnias. So we have improved financial result by 27 billion hryvnias instead of huge losses in 2020. In 2021, we have already had profit by the end of the year. Those are still unaudited financial results, but still these are financial results we have submitted to statistical bodies. Then Q1 2022, even with this huge destruction, even with sharp decrease in the amounts of electricity transmitted and drop in our income by the end of February and in March, still we have had 2 billion hryvnias of net profit in Q1, even though we still had to compensate also more than 2.6 billion hryvnias of negative foreign exchange difference. So due to our successful operations in the balancing market, due to our income from access to interstate lines, we have competitive procedure of allocation of that capacity among market participants. And due to our profitable operations, we have managed in Q1 2022 to achieve a rather strong net profit, 2 billion hryvnias. For 2021, we have paid to the government more than 1.2 billion hryvnias in taxes. In Q1, we have paid almost half a billion hryvnias in taxes, and we plan to pay about 120 million hryvnias in advance to Ukrainian state in taxes, so that our state, our military, will be able to use that resource for our victory. If there are any questions, you are welcome to ask them. In mid-March, you announced some technical synchronization of Ukrainian grid with the European Union. Does it already have any practical consequences? Yes, indeed. I remember like we had that meeting next day in Ukrainian Media Center, and we discussed this important event. Yes, we have already had some practical consequences. First of all, Ukrainian grid has been enjoying strong technical support from the European Union, from the European grid. We operate in a completely safe way in our energy grid. Ukrainian users have guaranteed energy supply. The balance of the Ukrainian grid has been maintained. For these more than 2 months of Russian aggression, it has been maintained. This is the first practical consequence. We have reliable electricity supply in those territories where the infrastructure is still intact, which is most of the Ukrainian territories. As a second result, we have already opened opportunities for exports in some areas. First of all, it's about exporting Ukrainian electricity to the Republic of Poland. About 200 megawatts can be exported now. Also, starting literally today, there has been export carried out to Moldova. This has been the first case in many months that Ukraine has been exporting its electricity to a country which depends quite strongly on electricity generated on Moldovan thermal power plant, which is owned by Interrao. In that way, not only we as a country earn some money from that export, but also we partially make the Republic of Moldova less dependent on the electricity generated on actually Russian power plant in Transnistria. Also, I would like to mention that Ukrenergo, our hydropower plant operator, has been the first company exporting to Moldova after synchronization. And basically it shows with its example that this procedure of competitive European auctions for access to interstate transmission lines that we run enables also state-owned companies to efficiently and effectively sell their electricity for export, bring huge profits to Ukrainian state. Can you clarify the numbers? We are now talking about 100 megawatts approximately. That's to Moldova over which period of time? These supplies start today, and we hope that they will be stable. Any questions from journalists? You are talking about 2022, and you say that you have been making some profit. Does it have anything to do with the fact that consumers understand your difficult situation and started paying better for their utility bills? Unfortunately, after the beginning of the invasion, there has been a sharp decline in the amount of money collected from the market sources. It sharped significantly. It dropped in significant way, in sharp way. It's not only about Ukrenergo, but all energy companies. We all remember an example of COVID situation. Unfortunately, we have already had some experience. And the example of this invasion shows that definitely the payments drop in such situations. And the challenge that we have now been facing as the industry is about the fact that we have to get certain amount of money into our industry, at least for a short term, in order to survive those first several months of shock, in order to have all companies in the market, those systemic companies on which our energy security depends, they should have a sufficient amounts of money to operate in a normal way. Since we are a grid operator, we spend money, we spend the income that we receive, not so much on our own operations, not so much on supporting our own infrastructure, but on those market functions. We pass that money to market participants for certain services they provide to the grid. So it's very important for us as a company to have those financial resources, to be able to pay in that electricity market. And while we have this drop in payments, it's important to be able to use loans to support our liquidity, to use the money that we can also pass to market players. We can pay with that money to pay for our liabilities, and in that way we also support other market participants, their normal operations. And yesterday we signed an agreement with the BRD for 50 million euros to get liquidity support. We have been the first state-owned company who managed to get money from international financial institutions after the invasion. And for the BRD, as far as I know, this has been the first transaction on the global scale after the beginning of this invasion. So it was a very important step made yesterday, and it enables us to look confidently into the future. There was a question.
Volodymyr in a navigation magazine, Czech Republic. I would like to ask you, I hope it's a right question, if you have any contact with workers of this on occupied territory where is a hydropower plant, Nová Kachovka, and a nuclear power plant in Energodar. If the workers stay there and they take care about the power plants, and if they are okay. And also, you already mentioned it. Was it a big problem for the energetic system, the loss of these power plants? And are these which I mentioned, the biggest power plants on occupied territory? Thank you very much.
Дякую за питання.
Thank you for this question. Well, employees at Kakhovka hydropower plant, which is indeed in temporarily occupied territory, occupied by the enemy, they interact more often with the management of Ukrenergo, which is managing that power plant, but also whenever possible, and as you probably understand, there are rather limited possibilities, but when it's possible, there are certain technical communications on our dispatcher line, because the power plant continues working in the Ukrainian energy grid. So there have been some technical communications. They are not on the full scale in this situation, but some communications are maintained with people there. About your second question, could you please repeat it?
If it was a big problem at the beginning, the loss of these big power plants, and also I would just like to add, is the electricity from both power plants now going to east part, I mean to the partly occupied territories, or you still have electricity from these plants? Thank you.
Безумовно, це.
Of course, this is a huge problem. It was a huge problem, and it is a huge problem. The problem is about the fact that any power plant lost in the energy grid, energy system, is about certain technical risk and about certain decrease in our capacity in generating electricity. And this generation of electricity, especially during the war, is of critical importance for energy security and generally for security of the state. So this is a problem, but Those power plants, most of those power plants, other than Luhansk thermal power plant, which was strongly damaged, Kakhovka hydropower plant, Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, they are operating. They are operating in Ukrainian energy grid, in Ukrainian territory. So basically, from the Ukrainian energy system, Ukrainian grid perspective, they are working for Ukraine. They are working the Ukrainian grid. Ukrinform. Good afternoon. My first question is, could you please tell us about how this full-scale invasion affected the company plans for this year? We had to drop our non-priority investment projects, which are not of high priority, because some of them were just impossible to implement during active combat actions. We had to radically review our repair campaign. We had to focus on disaster recovery, not on planned repair, because we had to focus on our efforts to repair those broken lines and substations. We have radically optimized our costs, our expenses, and our financial results for Q1 this year, 2 billion hryvnias in profits, is also a result of our optimization of our operating expenses, our OPEX. Also, now we are operating in more short-term planning mode, more shorter-term planning. Any large-scale investment projects, which take usually 3 to 5 years in the energy sector, it's about long-term, so we postpone the beginning of such projects until after our victory. In other aspects, we had to accelerate our Euro integration very significantly, our synchronization with European grid, and we achieved it. Now we have to accelerate very strongly providing technical possibilities, technical capacity for full-scale export and import with the European Union. I have already mentioned first 300 megawatts of electricity flows between Ukraine and Moldova and Poland, and our potential is much higher. So, you know, to understand how technically difficult it is to open exports after synchronization, you know, when you cut the grid from a large energy system like CS countries, and when you join Europe, it's like there is some medical analogy. When there is transplantation of an important part of the body, important organ like heart, like in how many days will the patient be able to run for a long distance? That's the question that doctors would ask. Energy people, after synchronization, ask a question: how soon will we be able to restore commercial operations after the synchronization? So this is very difficult in technical terms, very complex technical effort. It usually takes a year to 2 years to prepare those energy grids which have been connected physically to start commercial exchange. But we are Ukrainians. To accelerate things by a factor of 10 times, especially during the war. So there have already been some exports, and we have been working on significantly increasing those exports, the amounts of that export. That's how we adjust our plans for this year. We had to do it 10 times faster. Ukrinform, and we are to finish. One more question is about restoration of those damaged lines and grids. Can Ukrenergo use help from international partners, and which type of help? You know what? We have had very friendly partner relationship with our European colleagues, with grid operators, transmission system operators in Europe, European countries. And they provide wide ranging technical support for us to receive materials that we may be lacking in our warehouses, to receive those materials in time. Large part of it, many of those partners have already supplied those materials. We have already had equipment in our store warehouses for free, equipment and materials we use to restore electrical transmission systems. electrical grid. So this assistance has been coming since the very first days of invasion, and we have been impressed with the level of support and solidarity from European system operators. And you know what? System operators, grid operators are rather conservative organizations. They are not usually making any fast, sharp steps, but in this situation everybody was working in a very effective way and demonstrated absolute solidarity with us. So we have been restoring our networks also using help from our European colleagues. The last question. Good afternoon, I'm Miloš Gusowski, I'm from Polish Radio. Said,
ready to sell electricity to Poland. You mentioned that you are ready to start, but can you tell me something about the numbers?
Наразі
at the moment, we have already been exporting to Poland, We have received the permission for such operations in the very first days after synchronization with NCOE, and the scale of those exports is within 200 megawatts. Within 200 megawatts. Of course, we look at big inspiration at the project of restoring one more line between Ukraine and Poland. It will take a bit of time. Unfortunately, it cannot happen in the next days, a couple of days or weeks, but we hope that jointly with our Polish colleagues, we will be able to implement this project rather quickly, to restore the line which we used to have back in Soviet times, during the Warsaw Pact, and it will significantly strengthen our connection, energy connection with the European Union. And for European consumers, it will, that trading in electricity with Ukraine is not only about supplies of cheap and environmentally clean energy, which is important, but in this current situation, it's also an opportunity to get rid of the dependence in a more efficient and quick way, to get rid of the dependence on Russian gas. Because, when you buy energy resources like electricity in Ukraine, the European Union will reduce its need for gas to generate that electricity in the EU. So it's extremely important. This is an extremely important step. It's about expansion of trading opportunities. We have been working on those things jointly with all European system operators, practically around the clock and 7 days a week to make it possible. Volodymyr Kudrytskyi, Chairman of the Board of Ukrenergo, thank you for this discussion. And our next briefing will be at 1:30 p.m. And here we'll have families, relatives of heroic defenders of Mariupol, who are now in Azovstal steel factory. 1:30 is our next briefing. Thank you.